Hello, hello, Facebook world again. We are live this morning with Dr. Jeffrey Fannin. We are absolutely just incredibly blessed to have this neuroscientist on the line with us today to just educate us about brain health and truly brain food. So as you guys are jumping on here, I would highly encourage you. This is information that I think everybody needs to know about.
Yes.
You can start a watch party by clicking below. It should say start watch party right under the video. If you don't see that, you can simply share it. But tag people onto this. Tell us who's on here, where you're from, all of that great information. But I want to give you
And
this.
I'll say too, can
Yeah,
I say one other thing?
sure.
Something that always helps me anyway, whenever I watch Facebook Lives or interviews, if there's something that sticks out to you that Dr. Fannin says,
Yes.
please write that in the comments, because somebody else that'll be watching it later or see it going by, they'll be like, oh my gosh, what is that? And how can that,
Right.
benefit them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
please
for adding
comment,
that.
people.
Yes.
This really helps.
So start the watch parties right now. Start sharing right now. If you're watching the replay, you can even do a watch party as the replay. But we have Dr. Jeffrey Fannin here, holds a PhD in psychology, you guys, an MBA, a Bachelor of Science degrees in mass communications. He's the founder of the clinic and research center Thought Genius in Peoria, Arizona. He has worked in the neuroscience field, researching, training the brain for over 2 decades. Incredible. Dr. Fannin, he's an international speaker, you guys, leading authority. He's an author in the field of optimal brain performance and cutting edge neuroscience research and meditation.
Oh.
They always say, if you want to learn from the best, get the best.
Yes.
and let them be the expert. So
yes.
with that, Dr. Fannin, when we talk about brain food and unlocking the brain's potential, we like to get people familiar with Axio. So would you give people kind of a 10,000 foot overview of Axio and why we consider it brain food?
Well, in my cabinet in my dining room, I have a great big brain, and on the top of it says brain food. But I put little packets of Axio in there, as brain food, because I consider it brain food. And some of the research and things that I've been doing really points to the fact that it really is helping with our focus, our concentration. We're seeing it in the evidence in with kids in school, with adults. I work with a number of executives and high-profile athletes and things like that. And Axio is an extremely big part of what they do and how they go about it. So I would consider it brain food. So thanks for asking that question, because I think
one of the things that I love.
Food. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, one of the things that I love, when I first heard about it, somebody said it's an executive function neurotransmitting drink. And I'm like, what in the world? But that sounds really, really good. And I'm like, get my neurotransmitters firing. So
yeah, well, let's talk about the science of that for just a second.
Yeah,
When we talk about executive function, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex. So there's part of what we call the default network of the brain. It involves the prefrontal cortex, and it also is an area that we would call T5, right behind the left temporal lobe. And that's part of our default network. So when we have this dialogue that goes on within ourselves, and that is the circuitry that functions. And this is where things like Axio come in, so that you can have that dialogue. Now, when we talk about the prefrontal cortex, there are 2 sides of that. So when people have more of activity on the right prefrontal lobe, we might consider them as looking at the glass half empty. Or when they have more activity on the left prefrontal lobe, now the glass is half full. So we have more positive statements, more positive thinking, and things like that. So it's very important, when you look at the function of Axio, which side of the prefrontal cortex, or your executive functions, risk-taking, things like that, is it activating? And what I'm seeing in the research is people who are on Axio they have more of the left prefrontal cortex after they start taking Axio.
Wow. So that's why they talk about increasing mental energy, but also improving positive mood.
Well,
Right.
and I'll tell you too, Dr. Fannin, and he doesn't know this, but we were really fortunate to have Axios, Sean and I, to try it before it was ever released to everybody out there. And I drank it, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to notice? What am I going to feel? First of all, I'm like, thank God it tastes good. That was the first thing I thought. But then after that, I was driving down the road and I kept thinking, what am I noticing? What am I feeling? And all I could share with everybody in the very beginning was, I said, I feel like I'm in a better mood. I said, I feel like I have a permagrin. And people were like, Michelle, you're always positive. You're always thinking of, good things and you're happy. I said, yes, I do definitely always try to think positive and, be happy and think, these great things, but that doesn't mean internally that I always feel that way. Sometimes it's just, I have to change my mindset. This made me feel lighter. It made me feel happier. And that was the first thing that I explained to people.
Yeah, when I first started taking Axio, it was really important because when I'm doing brain maps and looking at EEGs and things like that, it can really wear your brain out, because we're burning up a fair amount of cortical glucose in the brain in order to maintain our focus and our concentration. So when I started taking it, I noticed that when I do better and can get a brain map completed for somebody in less time when I'm drinking the Axio, because especially in the afternoon when our circadian rhythms begin to drop down a little bit and that afternoon lull comes in, and then I will start drinking my Axio.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take very much before my mood will change. I feel more energized. I feel a lot more focus, concentration. So when you're reading 20 lines of EEG data, for me, it's like reading sheet music, but I can do it with less effort once I'm taking some Axio. So I always have my Axio with me.
I love it. I love it. And your explanation puts into words what we feel.
Yes.
We have a hard time explaining to people, exactly how you're stating this. But I think another thing for people, they usually are pretty visual. And when you were talking about the different regions of the brain lighting up, could you share with everybody some of those slides that you have, just so they can kind of see what you're referencing when you say different regions are lighting up?
You bet. Let me share my screen here, and then I can show you some slides.
Perfect. And while he's grabbing that, you guys, again, comment below where you're coming in from, tag people into this information, share it as a watch party, just share the video in general. This part is incredible.
Yeah, I am so passionate about brain health, and I think we all are. And I know for our children, it's the first thing that they do in the morning is they have their Axio.
For sure.
They take all of our other products as well, and then they get off for their day. This weekend, our daughter's going to dance, and she's going to be having a lot of extra Axio with her for her dance and volleyball. And whenever they're having their extra tests,
we can tell within 24 hours when they haven't taken it as well.
And they have commented as well when they haven't. So
yeah, I can tell when I haven't had enough and it starts to wear off, or I've gone a day or something without drinking it. I just don't feel as energetic and on center and on focus, that sort of thing. So what we're looking at here is an individual, and we're talking about focus and concentration, basically. So down here on the left side, where we see this area here, 13-14, these are what we call your sensory motor rhythms. This is what you're paying attention to. And so we see this pattern begin to build here, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 20 hertz. These are individual frequencies that we see. So this was the brain map of this individual who had a great deal of difficulty focusing, concentrating, staying on task, those kinds of things. And then we put him on the Axio as part of this regimen that we put him on. And we had him on it for 12 days. Now, in all truthfulness here, I really didn't know that I was actually going to do a study here. So it was one of those situations where I'd read the science, and it was very important to me. I wanted to see how this worked with the people I'm working with and see if there was any difference. So I just happened to have the equipment and the time and the expertise to measure this. So we put him on it for 12 days. Then we did another brain map. and looking at these frequencies. And so the first thing you'll notice, and you don't need to be a neuroscientist to decipher this, is the lack of red down here from 13 up to 20 hertz. It's all green. And if you look real close at the legend here, green would indicate that it's in the normal range. Now, what does that mean in the normal range? It means that we're looking at this at standard deviation. So the red down here is 3 standard deviations above what is considered normal. So as part of this, there is a normative database, and there are over 4,200 individuals. So we're using this individual's demographics, male, female, left, right hand, age, to compare where do they fall in that normative database. So that's why we see all of this green here. Now, I have to tell you, that was a great shock to me. Now, let me go to the next one, which is the 21 through 30 hertz. And you can see the real difference here, because I've been doing this for over 24 years, and I had never, ever seen anything like this, ever. And so as a scientist, you start to look at that and say, well, why is that? Well, what's going on here? And so because I hadn't seen that, and the way that I train the brain and do those sorts of things, for it to happen this quickly in 12 days, there had to be something unusual going on. So when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe it's equipment, or maybe it's a cap, maybe it's this, but everything checked out. All of the data checked out. So then I started looking at it more from a quantum physics point of view. Now, I know all of you quantum physicists out there may have a different perspective, but my perspective is that when we look at cellular function, and we have 600 million trillion cells in the body, and those cells have to be what we call dynamic. So they have to be able to pass energy and information from one cell to the next cell right along here. And so that's what had happened. This regimen, and with the Axio increasing the concentration, it allowed those cellular functions to happen at the metabolic level. So deep down in the cells, it was opening that up. Now, what that did with that pathway is allow for greater concentration, greater focus, more energy, the things that we're talking about and dealing with here. Now, it took a little while for some of that to take rest with what we would see on the outside, you know. And so if a person's having trouble focusing and concentrating, you know, they may have gaps in their learning, and those gaps need to be filled in with a tutor or something like that in order to increase that focus and concentration. But now the pathways have been opened up to the point where that learning and the other elements with these activators can happen.
This is incredible, you guys. My mind, I've heard him talk about this before, and my mind is still blown away. And I want to go back to one thing that you said in there. You said in 24 years, you've never seen anything like this in the scans. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. That's very accurate. So
it's chills. Makes me emotional,
pretty amazing.
actually.
So let me see if I can get to this next slide here.
You guys put in the comments below what you think about Dr. Fannin and what he's showing you with these brain scans. This is incredible information.
Yeah, and definitely you guys too, while he's doing that, tag people. I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, this person needs to hear about this person.
And I'm sipping on my my hot Axio. I actually put it, instead of doing like tea or something like that, when it starts to get colder, I just put in hot water, boil some hot water, and then throw in my Axio into that.
That's our favorite.
Yeah, I've done that too. It tastes really good that way.
It does. Awesome. Yeah.
Now, when we were talking about the coherence is a very important factor. So these other slides that I showed you, and when I saw all the green, then I started looking at that and said, how is that happening? Well, it deals with coherence. That's the energy and information that is coming down these pathways and dealing with it. So when we look at before, I will put him on this regimen, and you can see the red and the blue here on the left, and that's not good. So his focus and concentration, his coherence or the way the dynamic interaction with the cells, it was fighting against itself. So once we put him on the regimen, and when we see very few lines or no lines at all, it's comparing it to the normative database and says his coherence is functioning in the normal range. How great is that? Now, as a neuroscientist, I look at that and say, this is really a miracle, because in the way that we look at things, we have a way of measuring what has actually transpired in activating and opening up these particular areas of the body. And we now know that it is coherence that is actually happening in the body. So the ability of the cells, those 600 million trillion cells, to communicate with one another is the important factor here. So for focus, concentration, executive function that we were talking about, you have to have coherent cells in order. Otherwise, it's kind of like here on the left, we might liken this to when you're tuning a radio and you're trying to get it on the station, you're not quite on the station, you get a lot of static. And so when you're able to get it on the station, it's the thing that we're looking at on the right here in that slide, that now you're on the station, the music is clear, everything can come about. And so your focus, your concentration, your executive function can now function at a much higher level.
Wow. And that's also what we'd be referring to as mental clarity and brain fog being lifted. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's very accurate. So, I mean, this is a pretty good representation that people talk about brain fog or monkey mind, those kinds of things where you got too much busyness. So over here on the left, the red would be too much busyness and the blue would be the brain fog.
Okay. Awesome. Wow. That's unbelievable. And what I'm also hearing you say, Dr. Fannin, is that there's a cumulative effect of taking the product daily.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Because once you start dealing with this on a regular basis, you've got to keep those pathways open. You've got to allow this. So if I went 4 or 5 days without taking it, my brain would go back to what it's like on the left. So, some people say, well, do I have to stay on this for life? Well, why not?
Right. Right.
Why not do that? Because if you're getting that effect, you're increasing your focus, your concentration, your ability to think better, less brain fog. Why would you not want that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to me, this is an absolute no-brainer. Why wouldn't somebody integrate this into their health strategy? Who wants to walk around with that confusion and fuzziness? And like you said, the radio dial just being a bit off, where you're getting that static and just not being clear in high definition is what I would call it.
I love that analogy.
So you mentioned earlier about athletes and professional athletes that you've looked at and studied as well too. This is a product that is approved by the Banned Substance Control Group. Why would a high performance athlete have the benefits that you would recommend something like this for them?
Yeah, well, with athletes and things that I've worked with or other interviews I've done with high profile athletes and people like that, what you're looking at, and when I started to read the studies, and the information from the Banned Substance Control Group, it really caught my attention because of the few products that are out there. The Axio is one of 40 products, I think it is, that are on the total market that is approved for athletes. Now, whether you're a high school athlete or a college athlete or professional athlete, the process is still the same. It's allowing that to open up and take place. So we all know in athletics that you get injuries. So opening up these pathways are going to allow an injury to heal quicker. It's also going to open up your field of focus, concentration, and awareness. So this whole coherence thing that we're talking about, no matter what sport you're playing, it's going to open up that awareness so you can take in more information. And usually when athletes get injured, it's because their focus and concentration narrows and they're not picking up the information outside themselves, and they don't see the accident coming, or they can't respond fast enough to get their body to do what it needs to, and they get injured. And so I think that's one of the great benefits of things like Axio. Not only is it approved, by the Banned Substance Control Group, but It helps with injury. It also helps with getting ready to perform at a high level. If you're an athlete and you know the recovery time, for those of us that go to the gym and things like that, there's that lactic acid get build up in our cells, and we have to get that out in some way. And sometimes that just takes time. Well, this is opening up those pathways to allow that recovery time to be shorter, because your body is handling it in an entirely different way. We are activating that whole cellular mechanism to allow your brain and your body to function at a much higher level.
That's incredible. So on the recovery side of it, this particular product, Axio, does help in the recovery.
Oh, no question about it. I was doing an interview with somebody in France, and we were talking about rugby. Now, rugby is kind of close to me because I played rugby when I was in college, and it is kind of a very athletic sport. Let me say that. I played second row, and so my nose got broken a lot.
Oh,
so
wow.
I wish I'd had Axio back in college days so that I could have taken that. But I can tell you from what I've studied since then that it would help that recovery time. So I would be ready to go for the next practice, the next game, whatever, without, wearing myself down as a result of that. So Axio is a really high performance supplement to the things that you're doing.
I love how our daughter has mentioned, in sports, just like the cat-like reactions.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's it, right? It's just the quick and going and the reaction time. And she's commented on that. And I know for me, specifically in conversations or being on calls or, something really important, I feel like I know where I'm going next. Right. Much better when I've got my Axio in me, which is
right.
So
That's that
great.
whole executive function thing that we were talking about. Your prefrontal cortex is functioning at a much higher level, which allows you to assimilate information, to make better judgments, to assess better the risks that you're involved in, and do it at lightning speed.
Wow.
Yes.
So this is almost like upgrading a computer processor, right? You're taking up the old processors and you're putting in the latest and the greatest for your body to perform the way that it used to and the way that it's intended, right?
Exactly.
I was thinking as well, we've been talking of different friends whose children have been on Axio over the years, and just some of their comments. One of my girlfriend's little boys, we love Axio. Like, we've got them all over. So if anybody's watching, I'll kind of put these up. They come in these great little packs, and we just throw them in. I throw them in my purse. They're all over our house in backpacks. But so I'm talking to this little boy. His mom's not even there, Stone. Yeah. And I'm like, Stone, how do you like the Axio? And he's like, Miss Michelle, I just have to tell you, I've been a much better boy at school. And I said, well, that is wonderful. What have you noticed? He said, I'm able to sit still longer. And he said his behavior is just so much better. And it was interesting too, in that conversation, I think he was 8 at the time. And he said, again, I love how he says, Miss Michelle, I love his manners. And then he says, Miss Michelle, I'm so much more focused. At 8 years old, what 8-year-old uses the word focused? That's all I could think about. And then I had another friend. So this was a little boy in Florida. And then I had another friend here in Sioux Falls, and her son said the exact same thing. Use the word focused, and I'm a much better boy, just calmer and just better to be in class and sitting still. Yeah. Better.
And we've had parents that don't even tell the teachers that they're changing something in whether you call it their dietary intake or just what they're doing for their health. But the teachers are even commenting to them, I don't know what's changed with the child, but something is dramatically different.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, how those changes would be impacted, just with what you've talked about with the brain and the coherence?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the fundamentals of this whole thing. Yeah. Opening up those pathways to allow those things to take place. So when we look at the prefrontal cortex and your son says, I'm being a better boy, He may not be able to put that in exactly scientific terms,
Mhm.
but he knows he feels different and he acts different and he's not getting into trouble. So he just feels better overall as a human being,
Yes.
to be able to do that. I mean, how great is that?
Yeah.
And when you hear that from your own child or other people's kids, that's the thing as a parent you really hope for. And to have that actually happening as a result of doing something as simple as taking Axio on a daily basis and allowing those pathways to be open, allowing the judgments of, should I do this, should I do that, getting that prefrontal cortex and having more positive thinking. I mean, how great is that?
And I think it's just such a gift. Sorry to interrupt you. I think it's just such a gift too that it tastes good. Our daughter just had a dance party recently, and all of the girls wanted Axio, and they don't know, why this is so good for all this,
Right.
great science. They just know that it tastes good. And when they come over, so I made a big pitcher of Axio, and I love as a mom in our house, we don't do soda. We don't do all the, we don't go to the store and buy juices. We do make our own fresh juice, but we don't have those things around, but we drink a ton of Axio. And as a mom, I am so grateful to know what I'm putting into my children every day is not only giving them benefit, it's not hurting them, in any way.
Yeah.
So I'm just grateful that it's clean.
Doesn't that give you more confidence as a mom?
Totally.
And as parents to know that something like this exists and
Yes.
you can feel good about giving it to your children, taking it yourself,
Yes.
sharing it with other family members, that kind of thing. I mean,
yes. And my parents, my mom doesn't, she's like, I don't drink enough water. My dad, he said the same thing too. He's like, I don't drink enough. I love the taste of it. So he not only says he's getting a lot more liquids and fluids in him, but he feels a difference and he drinks it every day. So it's all ages. This is just an important thing. So,
yeah, and I think as a society, we're trying to be proactive with our health more than ever before, and we're trying to do it in ways that are natural, right? Instead of looking for synthetics or drugs and going down that route.
Red Bull.
When there's options that aren't synthetic, it's awesome. And we're talking about this being approved. I think you said one of 40 that's approved by the Banned Substance Control Group because it is so clean.
Yeah, when you look at all the products on the market, to only have 40 products that are approved says an awful lot about it. I'd like to throw something into the discussion here. You talked about as we get older and it's good for any age. And what I'd like to do is talk for just a second about back in 1976, there were 67,000 toxic chemicals that were on the market. And the Environmental Protection Agency decided they were going to enact a statute to test some of these toxic chemicals, but they only tested a handful that did not test very well. And yet they get into the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and causes what's called oxidative stress. And so there are over 200 diseases that get connected to oxidative stress. And as we get older, that can become more profound. We're seeing things like a proliferation of things like dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. And it goes back to the dynamics of this cellular thing that we're dealing with. But today, there are over 80,000 toxic chemicals. And so we have to kind of find a way to deal with that. And Axio is one of those ways that we can increase the mitochondria in the brain and the focus of concentration, help deal with the free radicals and antioxidants that go on in the body. So you're very right there, Sean, that as we get older and we begin to see that slowing down or that aging process, this is one way to help improve that.
Clean with clean products.
Yeah. Clean. I love that. I love that. Thanks for adding that in. And, when we talk about integrating this in, I know a couple of times you've talked about a kind of more complete approach that you're using when you're studying and doing these scans and stuff. It's a complete system that you're looking to get people on. It's Axio, NRF1, NRF2. What else are you looking at as overall
For optimal brain health.
Well,
package?
yeah, in addition to that, to give us the maximum effectiveness, I'm also adding in the NAD with some of the studies that we're doing now to help us understand how serotonins deal with the cellular function, because I think that's vitally important no matter what your age is, that plays in a very, very important part into the overall cellular function and cellular health. And I know what a difference that's made in my own life. And I feel so much better, have so much more energy and focus and concentration. I mean, it's just fantastic. So I want to do some additional studies to help people understand from a scientific perspective, this is what's actually happening.
That's awesome. I can't wait to share with the world some of the stuff that you've been working on. And it's unbelievable, especially when you can have those concrete scans that show what's happening. I mean, somebody can't say this isn't doing anything for me when you have that kind of proof and evidence that the product works.
Yeah, well, it's very empirical evidence rather than subjective. You know, we can say, well, I feel better, I focus better. That's nice, but what's it doing inside your body? If I said, tell me how your cholesterol feels, you couldn't do that.
Right.
You know, none of us can do that. But with the technology that we have today, I'm able to look at that before and after and see what the effects of that are.
I'm totally fascinated by it. I remember the first time, you know, seeing some of those scans and, you know, over the years as well, just learning more and more about what people can do. Cause sometimes, you know, people get scared, right? If, you know, they can't find their next words, or they have the brain fog, or they're just more tired. And we all say, oh, I'm just aging and this is just a part of it, you know, but there are things that can be done. And I'm just so grateful for your expertise. I'm so grateful for your knowledge. I'm so grateful for your time, for you coming here and explaining this. You know, we talked before we got on here about, you know, so there's so many different tools out there, and it's just our responsibility, you guys, to share this with the world so that it's out there. If people want to do it, they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, that's okay. But this is a mission. And we say all the time, people are a mission. And if we can get information out and people can really, really feel a difference and live life, you know, bigger, better, have more fun, then thank goodness, right? And so your expertise and your time, Dr. Fannin, we just celebrate you and are so grateful for you, and that you are out there doing these things, because there's so many tools that people just have no idea, right? And we get scared, we don't know what to do. Or, you know, there's people that are crazy biohackers and they're like, feed me more, feed me more. Ooh, there's this guy that knows how to do this. I want more of that. So there's a whole array, but we're just so grateful.
Well, thank you very much for having me on with you today. It's a real pleasure to speak with you guys and have a wonderful conversation like this and help people get educated and inspired and motivated to really take charge of their own health and the things that they want to do, and that there is a way for us to do that. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks again for your time. We want to be respectful of that. We will try to line something up down the road as well, where we can get back on it and maybe scan through what people are questioning, what answers that we can provide for them. But I think, you know, this was one of the most dynamic interviews that we've ever done. And again, like Michelle said, we're so thankful that you took the opportunity to bless people with your knowledge and your expertise.
Yes. So grateful.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, my
Dr.
friend.
Fannin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody,
Appreciate
for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.